So in a recent effort to perform, or to build rather, an authentication system, such as you see here that we all are familiar with, one of the topics that either plays for or against the consumer is this idea of browser or device fingerprinting. So we see here at the top a device fingerprint, which in this case is tied to the browser. And then if I click into both Edge, it's a different fingerprint. If I click into Brave, it's a different fingerprint. Mozilla, different fingerprint. And so the idea of this fingerprint is that it, generally speaking, acts as a unique identifier for the device. And to exhibit how prevalent or meaningful this is, it's been the topic of numerous papers. So this would be one of detecting scripts that are performing browser fingerprinting. The Brave browser, for instance, having an entire blog post on trying to obfuscate usual browser fingerprinting methods. And so another example of this would be, whereas you can, in theory, access the device memory to identify how much memory is on a computer, there have been specific steps by browsers to try to obfuscate what this number is, more or less to, as this text I've just highlighted, would demonstrate the usual values that are displayed. The browser has kind of more or less attempted to limit the amount of private information that websites can see, with the goal being that you'd only assess this information to determine the level of performance that a computer or visitor is capable of handling. So, what does this mean? It means that from a security perspective, that browser fingerprinting is able to do something such as detect, let's say your login gets stolen. It would become very quickly obvious using a kind of fingerprinting technique that the fraudulent hacker is in fact not the user due to browser fingerprinting. It would be somewhere on the magnitude of very hard to extremely hard to replicate that fingerprint, depending on how specific it is. Because of course it would be fairly easy for a hacker to just toggle between trying to spoof that they're a certain browser or certain operating system. But once you start to combine a dozen metrics, and I'll get into some more specific workarounds here in a second, that confidence metric that a user is in fact who they are claiming to be becomes very high. So it becomes very or extremely hard, again, to replicate that information. And so some of the more nuanced ways that people are trying to fingerprint browsers is, for instance, using a workaround that determines what installed fonts you have. And this one works by basically calculating the pixel height of an element on a page when you try to load a particular font. There's some other APIs that I haven't really explored, such as your drivers, which usually requires you to approve camera and microphone access, browser extensions, which I haven't explored. But I think perhaps the most interesting one is this canvas fingerprinting technique. And what this particular method tries to distinguish itself, in my mind, from the rest is that it accesses the Canvas API. It then displays a usual PNG graphic, and then it turns that information back into a data string. And there are fundamental differences with how that PNG graphic is displayed depending on what kind of GPU you have, what GPU model, and a lot of other information that, because it's reliant on the underlying hardware, is much more effective at proving a fingerprint. So I think in totality, it's an interesting subject, which when we consider it from a marketing and privacy perspective, is certainly something that is covered by GDPR. And so where GDPR doesn't necessarily protect a user is, from my understanding of it, is when it is required for the normal functioning of a website. So this generally means that if you're, browsing and you hit some kind of SEO targeted website, or it's some free website that they're just trying to hit you with ads, they could browser fingerprint you, but GDPR would protect against that. Versus, and this is all, of course, in the theory of the law. This has nothing to do with what happens in practice, because in practice, a marketer could just browser fingerprint you. And besides using, let's say, as we saw from that paper I showed, trying to detect a fingerprinting script going on, it might be hard to prove from a GDPR point of view if this is occurring. And then that means as well, though, that from a normal use of the website in order to function and operate securely, I think a browser fingerprint is an excellent way to prevent fraudulent or unwanted access of an account. So that means that if you change your computer or your device, or if a hacker tries to log in with your same credentials, that that credential will then be destroyed, and it will need to be renewed with your actual. You'll have to log in again. So basically, this prevents a hacker from trying to pretend to be you. So from that point of view, device fingerprinting is a good force in the world. Let me know what you think, and stay tuned or subscribe if you want more tech.